Welcome to the Potboiler. I'm Patrick Hughes, and this is Hollow Grim and the Winter in January, Part 2. Potboiler is an old term for pulpy paperback genre writing that I think deserves some warmth, and I hope you agree. Let's do the intro. Every year ends with winter. Comes to an end like everything else, with lifeless, unforgiving cold. As Hollow Grim monitors his wounds, as the temperature drops, and as the day grows increasingly dire, search through his memory of Judge Jameson's past for a list of suspects continues to occupy his mind. He needs to know the rifle that has him cornered on the frozen ridge so he can determine how to retaliate, or escape, or just survive. 3 episodes of this story will be offered with no embedded commercial interruptions. Visit patrickhughes.ca for links to me and my other projects. And please stick around after the story for some very light business. Enjoy. Let's play the music. Hollow Grim and the Winter in January, Part 2. July. It was 6 hours into my ordeal. The sun had just passed its highest on the way to the hottest point of the day. I could feel a level of stamina in me fading as my efforts to control my blood loss were most likely unsuccessful. There was certainly a great deal more hunt in the predator with his gun on me. I had to find a way to last through the night until sunrise. The next move from the shooter would offer a wide share of the insight I'd need to track the path back to his identity. He could choose to hunt me down, approach on foot directly, or by flank. He could have, at that moment, been making the long way around, risking my escape, but trusting his shot would keep me down. Moving from his position meant a level of impetuousness or emotion, both of which speak to inexperience. Or that time was a factor, and he had a deadline. There might have been another line to act on from his position or changing mine, by loosening the rock face above me, or a tree limb I couldn't see. The right apparatus and the ability to keep position speaks to strategy, discipline, and experience. Combinations of these observations and stimuli filled my head and played through over and again, beyond my control. I was out of the wind, but the cold temperature would compound the effects of blood loss in the short term. My concentration was slipping. I didn't have the time I needed to wait him out in this position. I took my remaining focus back into Irving Jameson's life to further define my list of suspects. Lieutenant Irving Judge Reaper Jameson completed his military service with little ceremony, opting to trade little on his record, as many tended to do, quietly returned to the Department of Justice as a prosecutor, based in Illinois, but made available to travel into the western states to try cases where the Attorney General had little or not enough reach. I finally felt the law making a difference. Something I think I see in your friend Grimm. People need law out here. In Chicago, following the law is like using the right fork at dinner. It's really just a matter of how you feel when it's your turn to be called out. The law works for you differently depending on the dinner put in front of you. Out here, it's not the fork so much as the predator holding it. And if he wants what you've got more than you're willing to defend it. Doc had a different respect for the judge. Whenever my father made the same statements, Doc would turn a witty ridicule against it. But from the judge, they were remembered as Western gospel. I can see the benefit of defending that will and showing these brave people that society has a spine. On that long-traveled road, somewhere in the Nevada sunset, he recounted, he met Sally Cheney, the third daughter of a notable landowner, at a farmer's market with a random hankering for roasted corn. She was almost 2 decades his junior, but that meant little to either. His slim and square features had stayed youthful in his travels. No person could take me apart like she could. That girl could fight a nation. Anyone that knew Irving Jameson better than a little knew that if the unburdened truth of him could talk, his years with Sally were by far his most treasured. His time with her by his side, bringing her own impressive education to bear on the legal matters often weighing on his mind, tempered his view on the law and his place in it. They enjoyed their work and loved their life. They owned a significant part of northeastern Nevada, bequeathed to her by her loving paternal grandfather, which earned them enemies across the veins of her family and their financial concerns. His legal career can easily be marked in chapters, starting with crusading early years in Chicago, his time in the military, the period traveling after the war, and his time with Sally in Nevada, and then the years after she passed. September. It was their 12th autumn together. Sally's own annual harvest ritual was to pester Irving about having children. He thought the time had passed him, but she assured him she would find the energy in him for the act and the outcome. Whether he relented officially or not, she was pregnant by that 12th New Year. Again, Irving was a new man. Changed by the abuse to his mother, changed by his education, changed by justice, changed by war, but truly new, with the seeds of his own family growing. Sally's small frame did not take well to pregnancy. Though her spirits were unsinkable, she was constantly weakened and ill. Prognosis was not good for their unborn child either. Despite all the bad omens, the delivery was on time and went surprisingly well. Doc Shillington, himself now settled nearby on the neighboring property, performed the birth, inspected the baby girl, and was 1 foot out the door with a handshake in motion when the judge heard a quiet call from the bedroom. Sally was saying she felt lightheaded. The bed was drenched in red halfway down from the footboard. She was hardly conscious enough to hold the baby, nearly falling from her embrace. Doc went right to work, but the damage was done. Hemorrhaging from her uterus, while they assumed all was well, she had lost too much blood too quickly. They discreetly agreed not to shade her last moments in fear. She passed, looking warmly at Irving holding their little girl, ghostly pale, assuming she was going to sleep off some exhaustion. They had agreed on the name Agatha, after his mother. Her little body carried a fever from her mother. He held her for 2 days, sleeping like an angel in his arm. He fell in love so deeply in those 2 days, he could have carried her for years. Her body gave up, and she died on the 3rd day. He buried them side by side and invited no one to share in his mourning. Despite no ill will from the judge, the hurt of it all made Doc give up his practice for the better part of a decade. That decade saw very little of Irving Jameson beyond the walls of his lonely home and the expanse of his property line. After multiple requests, he again accepted a judgeship when boredom finally overtook his depression. This was the time I came to know him myself, after my father was killed, when I stood before him on occasion for the death warrants I carried out on the behalf of the U.S. Marshal. I never had an appearance in his court that didn't have him mention my father, but it was always with respect. We certainly also had our share of controversial exchanges and lawful outcomes worthy of some revenge on both of our parts. Trapped between the rocks on the ridge, cold then to the point I was concerned about keeping my limbs, I started to consider that I may have caught the assassin making his exit. A skillful operative could use my injury as a diversion for his own escape, while my time ran down. The judge could be wounded as well in the house, in need of my help. I was cursing myself for my indecision and was holding back an instinct to leap from my shelter, take it on myself to right this ending. November. The judge was known to tell Doc, my father, and any other tavern mates esteemed enough, that he returned to the bench 9 years after losing his family because he had nothing better to do. Judge Jameson had no need for the wage. The Cheney estate would support him for several lifetimes. Even with a gambling habit that grew for a time with Doc at the Progress Tavern. He had aged in 10 years like a chair left too many seasons in the afternoon sun. His leather had wrinkled and cracked, and his color had all but faded. His hair was regularly poorly parted and combed, and he only sought out a real shave every couple of weeks. But his metal had withstood and kept a sharpened edge. His approach and application of the law was always objective and methodical, something a contract manhunter could easily appreciate. The law can be applied blindly and fairly to every citizen. Justice is another matter, sometimes not a mission for the courts. He knew how to make that line clear to an angry gallery. Sometimes it came in an impatient growl, and a wrap of hardwood, and often made him hated by the people he was endeavoring to protect. In a place like Chicago, a dense population and a great deal of poverty gives a lot of space to find an occasionally merciful interpretation. In northern Nevada, there's a desert full of desperate acts and a lot more guilty verdicts. Despite his lack of bias, his record pointed to severe rulings toward a certain level of criminal activity. It was a criminality for the entitled class, exploiting the people, building the country for them through organizations specializing in smuggling, racketeering, and protectionism. Sally hated that she came from wealth. At least she hated that she benefited from the system that bore the crime, that came with a white pressed collar and shook your hand, while it eroded the ground beneath your feet. She argued with Irving relentlessly over cold dinner plates and low candle wicks when the prosecution was bore the title of a citizen's name versus a corporation's title. And everyone knew full well the right answer over the legal one. He couldn't help but see those arguments through her eyes in his later days on the bench. Still ethical, but with a gavel he used like a hammer. Some claim that his aggressiveness cost Progress Township the route of the Union Pacific, which was built 100 miles to the north. That particular rumor always earned him at least one or two sneers and whispers when he came through town for poker. After sitting in the gallery for many of my father's testimonies, it was my own turn. My first filled death warrant was being contested by the local sheriff, 2 counties to the south where I lived. Same sheriff, an oily potato in a holster named Willie Tester, was also a witness for the defense. Mr. Grimm, despite Sheriff Tester's spirited testimony, you are clearly on the lawful side of this. Mr. Tester, the deceased, was charged in Carson City with in absentia and sentenced to death. A warrant was issued by the Department of Justice, which young Mr. Grimm legally carried out, with shocking efficiency, I might add. Whether or not it is a fair fight is quite irrelevant. I hope the rest of your day goes better, and my condolences to your cousin's family. The shortness of his tone came across as ridicule. The gallery chuckled as Willie Tester's round white face turned red, and his stare burrowed into the wall behind the bench as Jameson's gavel dropped. Okay, Hammond, what's the next case? The next case that day was announced by the clerk as the People versus John Gillette. Judge Jameson looked over the documents with his standard level of weariness. At a very precise point of the first page his expression tightened. I wasn't planning to linger that afternoon, but the change in his tone trapped my attention. I know this file. Also Tester's jurisdiction. Bring that man in. I've always liked watching someone clear in their intentions. When some form of pointless etiquette states they are best not to be, but then see them follow through. My father was always that way, unable and unwilling to hide his fangs. I watched the judge defying a sense of what he should know better, eyeing the defendant that was led to his table like a predator more angry than hungry. Read the charges again, Hammond. I don't think they heard it in the back. Yes, Your Honor. One Mr. John Gillette of Nye County, Nevada, is charged with willful destruction of private property and juvenile injury of one Emily Gillette. That's enough, Hammond. With deference to those of you listening and recording with sensitive ears, my apologies. But fuck that charge. The air pressure in the room dropped with the collective expression of disbelief. I have two simple questions for the prosecution, and spare me that look, like I used the wrong fork again. Is the property in question the burnt farmhouse at the edge of the county? Why, yes, it is, Your Honor. And is the juvenile injury in question that of this man's 6-year-old daughter, sustained when his dumb drunkard ass lied asleep in his yard while the house burned down with her in it? And these injuries are the ones she died from 2 days later? Why, yes, they are, Your Honor. The defendant burst open with emotion at the judge's remarks. Jameson looked at him unmoved. Solid as rock until then. He struck me as a man seeking forgiveness from his place in the corner. Prosecutor, what's your name again? No, I don't care. You were going to change that charge, or you can walk back to Carson City. The judge stood from his chair and leaned over his bench. Not myself, not this court, nor of the law of this land gives a flying hang about that burnt-down house or the losses of his rich landlord. This man is going to be charged with the wrongful death of that little girl, and we are going to hear that trial. Or I will hang that bastard right now by myself. Jameson knew the softened charge had been arranged by influential friends and other purchase friends of the easily bribable Willie Tester. He had seen law and justice trip over itself for far too long. He saw this birdish father and that hometown sheriff before him, and the injustice that started his path all those years back. The man has yet to deny it. His guilt is as clear as this side of my gavel. You do what's right for that little girl's soul. You do one good thing. I'll be here when you've updated the charges. It has always stayed with me. It seemed sarcastic, but left its somber mark on the mood. He said, "There is clearly one man too many currently alive in Nevada." The unraveling of discipline that I witnessed was at once satisfying and unsettling. He continued into a series of acrimonious statements directed dead on at Willie Tester. The plump sheriff reflected the judge's disdain, seemingly certain that his influence was being undervalued. Judge Jameson spent all of his remaining professional favors getting Tester's badge taken away. Tester made his thoughts on the bristling old judge well known to any other drinker that would listen. He ranted more than once that he was wronged and that the matter was far from over. Having been a sheriff for so long, he only knew how to trade in currency of old scores and unsettled accounts. All he could ever want, more than putting his boot down on someone under his authority, was exerting himself on a rung one up the ladder. He had to be near the top of any list of suspects in an action against the judge. I could see the end from my crack in the dirt and rock. I was starting to consider it. If I'd choose my own exit with my rifle, or let the sniper find me and offer another. To be continued in part 3. Thanks so much for listening to Hollow Grim and the Winter in January, part 2. Part 3 should be in the feed within the week if it's not there already. In part 3, the final part, as Hollow's position on the frigid cliff grows increasingly dire, desperation forces Hollow's hand, as his injuries and the falling temperature leave him with little time left to retaliate, as he feels his body continue to shut down. Let's do the call to action. If you like this story so far and you want more, or you feel compelled to throw your support in this direction, the fastest route is through my website, patrickhughes.ca. There you'll find access to my other projects, links to my books and ebooks on various platforms, and a contact me function. You can also lend your valuable support by liking and subscribing, following, and sharing this podcast on whatever platform you're visiting. It really makes a difference. Please add your voice with a quick click if you like what you hear. I do hope you share this. Don't keep any good fiction a secret. Take care.